Hi, how are you?
Good afternoon. I'm doing well. How are you?
Very good. This is Tammy. Let me put on the video so you can see me.
Hey, there you are. There's that
There
beautiful
you go.
face. I like that. I like that
Thanks
necklace.
for all of your help.
Oh,
Oh, thank
absolutely.
you. Thank you. Thank you again for all of your help, helping us, uh, get everything that we needed for, our property.
Pleasure's all mine. Glad to
Are
help.
you expecting a big crowd tonight?
Not too big. I think we had 8 people register, and then my partner Julian is going to be joining us as well.
Okay, very good.
So we're going to do our best to keep it brief and concise and hit on all the important points, and then not go too late.
Okay, not a problem. Just gonna go through some emails till you're ready to start, okay?
Okay, sounds good. I'll be here. Yeah, let me share my screen. All right, welcome everybody. I think most of you we've met before, certainly all the property managers. But to introduce ourselves to the new folks, my name is Andrew Zimdahl. I go by my initials AZ, and we've got my partner Julian, and together with another, we form Honeydew Energy Advisors. And tonight we'll be discussing everybody's favorite topic, DC's building energy performance standards. And we're also going to touch on Montgomery County, Maryland's building energy performance standards, which are very similar. So with that, let's look at an overview of what the presentation is going to be tonight. We're going to start off describing the benchmarking and BEPS process, just an overview of that. Then we're going to go into a deeper dive of the 4 different ways that you can comply with BEPS. And then we're talking about what happens if you're not able to comply with BEPS after the 5-year compliance cycle. And then we'll discuss what improvements you can make to your building in order to comply. And then finally, we're going to talk specifically about how solar energy arrays can impact your Energy Star score and hence your BEPS compliance. So I'm going to turn it over to Julian.
Thank you, AZ. So again, first, we're going to be going over benchmarking, right? Really the first step before we even get into BEPS. So since 2014, buildings above 50,000 square feet have been required to benchmark. In order to benchmark, you need to use a tool called Energy Star Portfolio Manager, where you essentially dump all the information about your building. So building characteristics, number of units, percentage of the building heating and cooled, so on and so forth. Then you always input your utility data, gas, electric, and water from the previous year. And then that spits out a score for that previous year based on how efficient your building is compared to other similar buildings. The score can range from 1 to 100, 1 being the least efficient, 100 being the most efficient. 100 is usually those LEED certified buildings. And there's another score, even though the Energy Star score is the most important one, there is another score that is pretty important when it comes to BEPS, which is your Energy Usage Intensity Score, or the EUI. This score, the range actually goes the opposite. And it's essentially just calculating your total energy usage, gas and electric combined, and dividing it by the square footage of your building So you're essentially going to get a KBTU, which is a form of energy measurement per square foot of your building, right? So you want to have a smaller number there, unlike the Energy Star score, because you're using less energy per square foot. And you can always check your building score, which we've been finding out the longer this has been up, the more outdated it's been. But the website you can go to is energybenchmarkingdc.org. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We'll have our email address on the last page.
And of course, if we're already benchmarking your property, we can develop a report for you. And I'll just add one more note to this slide, that the Energy Star score is a relative measurement of your efficiency. So it looks at what your building's EUI is, compares it to all the other similar buildings, and ranks you 1 to 100. Whereas the EUI score is an absolute score. So it doesn't matter where you are. There's no upper limit, if you will, to the energy usage intensity if your building is super inefficient, for example.
I appreciate that, AZ. Thank you. So now to the reporting deadlines. So if any of you manage or live in a building that's above 50,000 square feet, you already know that you've been required to benchmark since 2014. Now, starting this year, which has already happened, and if you have a building that's between 25,000 and 50,000 square feet and have not benchmarked yet, definitely reach out to us. But starting this year, that was due on April 1st, 2022, that set of buildings, 25 to 50,000 square feet, have been required to benchmark for the first time. The next step for these two groups of buildings, anything above 25,000 square feet, is to verify your benchmarking data and your report. And you will have to hire by 2024 a certified engineer to verify that all that data is correct, that you have all the correct meters that are associated with the building, to collect all the usage data, that your square footage is correct, which I would say 95% of the time it's off, because we're using the square footage that is provided by the DOEE. And for condos and co-ops, that square footage data isn't really available. So they've really only been using the individual unit square footages from tax documents and combining that. So we've realized that the square footage they're providing does happen to be off, and that's definitely something you want to confirm. But at that time, 2024, you do have to hire a certified engineer to verify that for you. Doesn't mean that you can't verify the square footage ahead of time. And that's something that we can also help with in providing different verification companies. Now, the last set of buildings will be required to benchmark, which is 10,000 square foot to 25,000 square feet, on April 1st, 2025. So we still have some time, but it is coming up. So if you're managing any of these buildings, definitely let them know. Now, for BEPS, Building Energy Performance Standards. This began January 1st, 2021. This was implemented through the Clean Energy DC Omnibus Act of 2018. So really what this means is we've been benchmarking for all these years, and this is only applies right now to buildings above 50,000 square feet. But essentially they take your 2019 score and they determine whether you fall above or below a 66. If you fall below a 66, which is the median score for DC multifamily buildings, and I'm assuming we're only talking to multifamily buildings here. If you fall below a 66, then you are subject to the new Building Energy Performance Standards, or BEPS for short. What this means is you'll be put on a 5-year compliance cycle where you have a few different options to comply, which we'll get to on the next slide. So before we get to the pathways, this is just a table that shows what the DC median Energy Star score is for each group of buildings or each building type, right? For multifamily buildings, that's a 66. So if you have a 66 or higher, you do not have to worry about BEPS in this first cycle. But if your score drops below a 66 past, or I guess in 2027, then that is when you will be required to be subject to BEPS and comply. For all of the other building types, there's one that stood out, which is retail stores. If you look, they have the same Energy Star score, median score, right, in DC. However, the EUI, the energy per square footage, is very different. 111 for multifamily buildings, and retail stores are all the way up to 401. So a lot more energy intensive for the retail stores and multifamily buildings. But as you can see with the scores, as AZ mentioned, when you're comparing to other retail scores, they all range around the same.
Other things that you can kind of glean from these numbers is if you have an Energy Star score of 50, that means your building is right in the middle nationwide in terms of efficiency. So when we see that the median score in DC for a multifamily building is 66, we can infer that the average multifamily building in DC is 16% more efficient than the average nationwide. And the opposite is, going the opposite way, we can look at school systems and warehouses for some reason in DC are way less efficient than the national average. So they have, in a way, less to do than the buildings that are already above the median score of nationwide.
Great. So now for the start dates for each group of buildings when it comes to BEPS. As I mentioned, for the first 5-year cycle, it's only going to include buildings above 50,000 square feet, and it already started January 1st last year. For the next set, 25,000 to 50,000 square feet, they're going to begin once this cycle ends, which is in 2027. And all the buildings that still haven't reached a 66 in the group of 50,000 square foot buildings and above will also be subject to the next 5-year cycle. For buildings above 10,000 square feet and below 25,000 square feet, they've got some time. Their BEPS start date will not start until 2033. And again, even the benchmarking, we don't have to begin until 2025, I believe was the date. Any questions so far?
I have a question. I'm the retail manager. My name is Mike Ryan, and I was looking at the previous, previously available BEPS for the building, dating back, 2018 it was 11, 2017 it was a 2, 2019 it was a 3, 2020 was a 16, 2021 was a 17. The building was built by a contractor and architect that built virtually at the same time the same building diagonally across the street. The building diagonally across the street is averaging in the 70s. I think the last one was a 79. And I'm just curious as to, is there some data point that I'm missing something? That the reason why there's a, I've talked to another engineer, and he was saying that a score this low is typically only on like a, even a building built in the 30s with window air conditioning doesn't usually get a score this low. Is there anything that you can point to that gives you these incredibly low numbers?
Is your square footage the same as the other building?
Virtually, it's not identical, but it's similar.
Okay. And have you?
It's over. It needs a 66. It's over 50,000 square feet.
Okay. And do you have retail spaces below, like on the first floor?
Yes.
Okay. That might be it. So we've seen a pattern of where multifamily buildings share the space with other retail spaces. And all of their scores are very low.
Well, again, the one across the street is a 79. So the discrepancy, the delta here is 76 points.
Yeah.
It's the same builder. same builder, same contractor, same architect, virtually the same product. One delivered a year later, but by the same company, by the same, some of the same workers. I mean, I can't, I've never seen such a discrepancy.
Is it
Mhm.
the same? Is the building
heard
used
of
for the
such a
same
discrepancy.
purpose?
Yeah, it's a multifamily building with retail on the ground floor. Kenyon's retail is about the same number of square feet in terms of retail as well.
Okay.
Virtually
we're-
identical.
we're-
Virtually identical.
We are very happy. You've piqued my curiosity. I'll be very happy to do a deeper dive into that data. But just one more question before we move on. Have you compared the total electric usage and the total natural gas usage between both buildings?
I haven't done it down to the letter, and over the last few years, the other building has had to sort of keep up the number, has had a variety of LEDs put in. But it's like having twins,
Mhm.
and one twin is the ugly duckling, and the other one's winning the beauty contest. It's just
Yeah.
I've met twins like that before.
I would, to put it gently, it makes no sense whatsoever.
Well, let's definitely follow up after the presentation. I want to see what's going on there. Okay, so Montgomery County is following the footsteps of the district, and they're implementing their own flavor of BEPS. And the biggest distinction so far is that they don't care what your Energy Star score is per se. They're really only looking at your energy usage intensity. And they're going to come up with more tailored plans for each building to reduce their energy usage intensity by a certain percentage at 4-year intervals. So their compliance cycle is going to last 12 years. And every 4 years, they're going to check in to see how much you've reduced your energy usage intensity. If you start out with a very high usage intensity, they're going to expect you to reduce it by a greater percentage. As you can see by this table here, we've got 3 hypothetical buildings. The diamond line would represent the least efficient building because it has the higher energy usage intensity. And they're expected to eventually reach a similar level of efficiency as their peers, meaning they're going to have to do more drastic improvements to their building over that 12-year compliance cycle. The other thing that is most likely going to change is the penalties in Montgomery County are currently limited to $500 for a first penalty, $750 for a subsequent penalty. So Montgomery County is lobbying the state government to give them more latitude to allow them to assess penalties that will make a meaningful difference in buildings' budgets, because as it stands, this is unlikely to change much behavior. And then it's also a little bit more complicated in terms of which deadline applies to which group. So you have right now, really the only buildings that are subject are going to be those county buildings or those non-residential buildings. That's kind of group alpha, and then you get to group 1, which is going to be non-residential buildings over 250,000 square foot. You don't actually start getting into residential buildings until group 3. So group 3, you're going to have 2021 be your baseline year, and whereas in DC it's going to be 2019. So whatever your energy usage intensity in 2019, that's what we're going to be basing your improvement from. And then you're going to have, you should have had your benchmarking data in by June 1st. If you've missed this deadline, if you're over 25,000 square feet, let us know. And then the first time you're actually going to be judged by how much you've reduced is not going to be until 2028. And then you've got residential buildings equal to or over 250,000 square feet. They are going to be on a similar schedule. And then you've got the final group, which is the residential buildings over 25,000 square feet, which is, going to be most of them. They are going to have 2023 as their benchmarking first deadline. They're going to be looking at 22 data as a comparison, and they're going to be well out into the 2030s that they're going to be actually looking at these improvements. And now we're going to switch back to DC and talk about the compliance pathways there. Julian, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Before we continue, were there any questions about the Montgomery County BEPS details? All right, then we'll continue. So as I mentioned before, if you are subject to BEPS, you're a multifamily building with a score less than 66. You were put on a 5-year compliance cycle, right? That began January 1st, 2021, and you can request for an extension as well. So really the deadline will be 2027, but you will need to use your 2026 Energy Star score, right? To determine if you've complied, or your 2026 EUI score. You really have 4 different pathways to choose from to comply, 2 of which are the most feasible. The other 2 are a lot more complicated, right? So we're really going to go over the first 2 here. The performance pathway is very simple. You just need to reduce your total gas and electric usage, right? Or your EUI score, because that includes your total gas and total electric usage, by 20% from January 2021 to, I believe, January 2027. Now, this is best for properties that usually have a very low Energy Star score or a very high EUI score, right? So if you usually fall below the median, which is a score of 50, and there aren't that many things that you can do to improve the building, then we recommend going with this offer. However, before you choose your pathway, we also recommend working with us so that we understand exactly what pathway to choose from. You can change your pathway throughout the process within the DOEE portal, but the most important thing is that this is due by early next year. So this is why we set up this webinar, to inform everybody. Now, the next pathway, if you have a score that's at the median or above the median, so at 50 or above, then we usually recommend the standard target pathway, which is essentially just reaching the 66 or above. Now, a lot of the time, if you're at a position where you have no idea which pathway to choose from, right? You're at a 49, let's say, for example. We recommend, and a lot of condos and co-ops have already done this, we recommend starting with an energy audit so that you first understand what improvements you can make to the building that will increase your score the most, right? And then understand how feasible are these improvements to implement. Can we pay for these? Do we need a loan? Were we planning on replacing our boiler right now? So on and so forth, right? Once you have that plan on all the improvements that you can make to the building and understand what is feasible and what is not, and how much each improvement will increase your score or decrease your EUI, then at that time, you can make a much better or much more educated decision on which pathway to choose from. The other pathways I can go over very briefly. The prescriptive pathway is a point-based system where you set up, well, first you have to do an audit. You have to present it to the DOEE. You have to agree upon which improvements you're going to make, right? And value each improvement on points. And you need to reach a total of 25 points in order to comply. There's a lot more work involved in this, a lot more back and forth with DOEE, but it is for those who are in need of more certainty And for those who are willing to do a lot of that work, and usually have an internal engineer who can handle the communication between the DOEE and provide them with the verification data, all of that.
Julian, okay, this is Jack. Quick question.
Yeah.
When you say 25 points, you're talking about the Energy Star score there. So if they have like a 25, if they get to a 50, or 30 to 55 or whatever.
So actually, and this is a great question, these are just points that the DOEE develops that are based on each of the projects you're going to move forward with. So it has nothing to do with the Energy Star score.
So theoretically, it's the third system beyond the Energy Star score and the energy use intensity score.
Essentially, yeah. So let's say, for example, you did your energy audit and you have 4 different projects that you can move forward with. One of them's a boiler project, right? That will be worth a lot more points, maybe 10 points by itself. LED might be worth 3 points, right? So on and so forth. And you need to get a total of 25. And this is what you decide with the DOE on, based on what improvement is worth how many points. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but there's no basic, or there's no like standardized format for how it's in other words, it's just a negotiation with DOE.
They'll give you a menu basically, and you can kind of choose through that menu and see how that menu of points lines up with the results from your energy audit.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Yep. And then the last,
I had another question.
yeah,
Okay, go ahead.
no, please go.
So if we did the performance pathway, we'd essentially need a 20% improvement from when? 2018, 2019, or from 2019, 2020, or because it went up, say 2019 to 2021. So my brief understanding of this, and please help me if I'm wrong here, if we got the 20% improvement, say from the base of 2018 and 2019, they wouldn't need an audit and they wouldn't need approval for, ECMs from DC. Is that right?
That is correct.
Yeah.
As long as the
Okay.
EUI is, and just to back up a little bit regarding the baseline. So for buildings that we started benchmarking in 2020, we were only able to get data from PEPCO and Washington Gas all the way back to 2019. At that time, they were not providing 2018 data. And that is the reason why. So for most buildings, they can use the 2018 and 2019 data. However, if you don't know if your 2018 score is accurate, and they'll decide that, the certified engineer will decide that during the verification process. But if your 2018 score isn't accurate, then you're going to have to request to use 2019 as the baseline. And that's what we're going to recommend for most of the buildings we're working with, unless the manager or the boards decide they also want to use the old 2018 score. But the baseline for most buildings will be 2019. And you will just have to look at your score in 2026 and make sure that the 2026 score, the EUI score, is 20% less than your 2019 score. No need to show audits, no need to work with them to create points on all that. It's a much simpler pathway than the prescriptive pathway that we described.
And so for a
And
lot of
one
folks
final
who
thing,
don't have, oh, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to clarify one other thing. Talks about the points and all that stuff. The building had been talking on and off about doing solar and stuff like that. So solar, wind, and renewables, if you did that, it would not affect the building. It would not help our BEPS score, right?
So
it's not part of it, right?
we're going to get to that in a little later, but I can give you a little preview.
Okay, sorry.
Solar will definitely help your Energy Star score. It will increase it. But unfortunately, at least for now, and the solar industry is fighting for this, solar will not reduce your EUI score. Your EUI score will stay the same. EUI is just looking at how much energy are you using in the building, regardless where it's coming from, right? Whereas the Energy Star score does take into account where it's coming from, right? So if you're using solar energy, then it's going to give you points, increase your Energy Star score, right? Unfortunately, it
But
doesn't
isn't BEPS,
UI.
yeah. Isn't the BEPS score kind of the whole enchilada, so to speak? Not the whole enchilada, but isn't that's the primary driver, the whole reason why we're having this discussion?
It depends on your pathway, right? There is no BEPS score per se. There's an Energy Star score, and then there's EUI. And so what determines whether you're subject to BEPS is your Energy Star score, if that's below 66. However, you can comply either by reducing your energy usage by 20% or getting your Energy Star score to a 66. So if you are taking the standard target pathway, then solar will help you achieve your BEPS goals. Is that clear? We'll go over in more detail later.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
And then just to wrap this slide up, the alternative compliance pathway is kind of a bucket left for all those special cases that don't fit neatly into the other three pathways. So if you do, if you don't have good 2019 benchmarking data, you can apply for a baseline adjustment, and then you'd be operating through the alternative compliance pathway, even though you're still trying to achieve the same goals as the performance or the standard target pathway. There's also, for folks who want to go above and beyond, become platinum LEED certified, there's also special provisions within the code to go through the alternative compliance pathway and maybe not have to be subject to the next 5-year compliance cycle because you've already gone so far. But again, 95, maybe even 99% of folks will be going through those first two performance and standard target pathways, which you will have to make a decision on by next April 1st, 2023. Any questions on this slide?
Great. So now the penalties. These are much higher than what Montgomery County is proposing at the moment. And how you can figure it out is essentially just adding a 0 to the end of your square footage and rounding down to the closest 100,000s. So here are a few examples. I'm going to skip the 742 square foot one because I doubt anybody here has that big of a building in DC. But if you have a building that's around 229,000 square feet, you're going to be paying around 2.2 million. If it's at 500,000 square feet, then you're going to be paying, or 50,000 square feet, you're going to be paying $500,000, so on and so forth, right? So the penalties are very high, but these are maximum penalties. The closer you get to your goal, right? So if you're going with the performance pathway, then you will, if you get closer to a 20% reduction of your EUI, then your penalty will reduce as well. Now for the standard target pathway, if you get closer to the 66, and we'll get to the calculations on the next slide, then your penalty reduces as well.
And there's also a provision, if you're at a 65, you're going to be subject to BEPS, right? And if you do nothing about it, no improvements, so you're still at a 65 in 2026, you will not be subject to the maximum penalty because you're already so close. So there is a provision. It's a little bit complicated how it's calculated, but the closer you are to a 66, you're going to have your maximum fine pre-adjusted downward pretty heavily.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
2 quick questions about that. First of all, is that a one-time fine or is that an annual fine? And
Every
secondly,
5 years.
It's after 5 years or every 5?
It's after 5 years. So
After 5 years.
the first compliance cycle in 2027, they're going to be basically calculating who is subject to BEPS and what their fine is going to be. The bill will probably go out later that year, 2028, and then they're going to start another compliance cycle. And they might change the fines at that point in time. It's not currently written into law. So the only thing that we know now is that there will be penalties coming after the beginning of 2027.
And
So,
we-
and if a building has been making progress but just hasn't quite reached its goal, because for whatever reason, that's the maximum penalty. I assume it would be just adjusted by what it, as you just said, be adjusted.
Yeah, that's
Or
a
how
very
close
timely question. So Julian can go over that right here.
And one last comment, just a
Yeah.
comment.
Yeah,
I
go
used to be in the enforcement business for Montgomery County, as a matter of fact. It was always our philosophy that especially when you're dealing a penalty of that magnitude, it's really better to have that invested into the building to help reach the policy goal rather than to just be punitive. So I'm hoping there will be consideration of that as well.
The carrot versus the stick approach. I agree. So yeah, so as we mentioned, even as you get closer to your goal, you're not going to be penalized the maximum penalty, right? So for example, with the performance pathway, where you need to reduce your EUI by 20%, if you've reduced your EUI by 10%, then you've reached 50% of your goal. And on paper, you should be charged 50% of what the maximum penalty was, right? But again, like AZ mentioned, if you're already at a 65 or a 64, that'll probably be even less. For the standard target, where you need to reach the score of 66, and you've narrowed that gap between where you were and the 66 by 25%, you still have 75% left to hit for your goal, then you will be charged 75% of the maximum penalty. And for the prescriptive and alternative compliance, I honestly doubt that anybody here will be using those pathways, but it's the same approach. If you implement only half of the 25 points that are needed to comply, then you'll be charged around half of what the maximum penalty is. Still no idea what the alternative compliance fractional goals will look like.
All right, so we've just gone over the compliance pathways, the penalties, the details of these laws. But at this section, we're going to be transitioning over to how are you actually going to comply now that you know what the rules are. And we recommend the first step for most of our clients is to get an ASHRAE Level 2 energy audit. And that audit, we're happy to share examples of audits that we've already done with similar buildings to yours. But basically, they're going to go in, they're going to document the conditions, they're going to take some measurements and verifications about the mechanical systems in there. They're going to document what the space is being used for. They'll give you a nice pie chart about where all the energy is being consumed. And then importantly, they're going to give you a list of what we call ECMs, which are energy conservation measures or building improvements, things that will improve the efficiency of your building, either lowering your EUI or increasing your Energy Star score. It's also going to have financial analysis, give you an estimated cost of what these ECMs are, a simple payback period, and other things that will help you in developing your forward-looking budgets. And then the more sophisticated ones will actually create an energy model where they can determine how various improvements will interact with one another and really give a detailed forecast of how much your EUI will be reduced or your Energy Star score will be improved. A big component of these audits is the low-hanging, low-cost to no-cost improvements that you can make to your building. A big one that we advocate for is the solar power purchase agreement. DC has literally the best incentives in the country for solar. And there are a lot of options with no money out of pocket and will save you a lot of money on your energy bill. And you can use those savings, and sometimes you can even get an upfront payment with a power purchase agreement, which you can apply to other ECMs. Another big one is LED lighting. We can do a similar model where it's fully financed. You kind of share the savings with the LED contractor, or you can invest in them yourself. And there's usually an under 2-year payback period for that. Same with lighting controls. And LEDs, just to give you a frame of reference, use about 10% the amount of energy as incandescent lamps. So it can make a very big difference for a relatively low investment. They'll also, within the audit, study how the different loads are being used, if anything's being wasted, if maybe you're overcooling your hallways in the evening, adjusting the set point on your boilers and heating systems can be another good low-cost solution. And then there's some other soft things, like promoting a culture of conservation with your board, making people more aware that the activities that they're doing in their unit has a big impact on everybody else. And to a certain extent, you may only have the ability to control directly what your common area is being used, and you have to come up with creative indirect means to encourage folks within their units to improve their behavior with regards to energy efficiency.
And just to give a quick example of that, I've been recommending to boards to create some type of flyer that you can put in common areas, in the laundry room, right by the elevators, that explain very briefly the potential penalties that the board could face if they don't reduce, or if the building doesn't reduce their energy usage. And then below that, maybe a few bulleted items of different things they can do to improve their energy efficiency in their units. And that could go a long way, or it could be a miss, but it's definitely worth trying.
Thanks, Julian. So then moving on to mid to high level improvements, these are ECMs that you might see on an energy audit.
A question.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Julian, do you have like templates that you've done for other buildings or other places that you could share with us potentially?
So I have not yet. Before, I just provided a lot of information from links that had already bulleted points on energy efficiency improvements within the units. However, it's definitely something that we're going to be developing. So if you don't mind reaching out to us after this, and I will work on it this week or next week.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
So variable speed drives, relatively new technology, but an important technology. These attach to standard motors. Most commonly, you're going to see this in fan motors and cooling towers and whatnot. And previously, those motors would be binary. They'd either be on or off. There'd either be 100% strength or 0% strength, and they would cycle. And it takes a lot of energy to run that fan up to full speed from being completely stationary. And there's also a lot of thermodynamic implications when you've got that binary fan system. So you can install a variable speed drive so it can be much more granular. The analogy I like to make is when you're driving a car and you need to accelerate, most people will gradually accelerate or gradually decelerate instead of, putting their foot on the gas the whole way. That would use up a lot of gasoline in your engine, and the same principle applies to any other motor. Variable refrigerant flow, this is a new type of cooling and heating system that's all electric. It's very efficient, and it also doesn't need ducts. So if you've got an older building, you want to avoid doing a lot of duct work, the VRF system can be a very economical choice if you're looking to do a wholesale upgrade. You can look at things like hot water efficiency improvements. And the reason it's only hot water is because your energy usage intensity does not factor in water usage. It only factors in the energy you use to heat the water. So these would only really apply to sink and mostly shower heads. Improving, your gallons per flush on your toilet is not really going to help you from a BEPS perspective. Boiler upgrades, a lot of old boilers in the district, were built after World War II using steam, which are great for battleships, not so great for multifamily buildings. There's a lot of leakage in the ducts. There's a lot of things that are being heated that shouldn't be heated, and we've seen all sorts of things in terms of old boilers. Replacing a chiller, many of you know this can be pretty expensive, but it can make a pretty big difference in your EUI. And then there's other things like combined heat and power. And And a big thing is just an energy management system. So you actually have reliable data that you can track the improvements that you're making in real time, and you can get a better sense of whether your building is going to be able to comply, well before the 2027, 2026 deadline. And then, building envelope is a big thing. It can be expensive. It can be invasive, but sometimes that will be needed to reach your goals. And the same can be said about window replacements.
Could I ask another question?
Sure.
To the extent that we might as a board member, I always have to plan for the worst case scenario, at least to be able to answer the question. But 20% of this building is affordable dwelling units, which are occupied by low and moderate income people. If we were to have to do one of the more expensive upgrades, it would be a common expense which is not subsidized for the ADU residents, and so they'd have to bear the full brunt of any kind of a special assessment, the same as any other resident here. Do you know, is the district looking at making, and I see financing available, but I assume that's from the company that would install the combined heat and power system. Do you know if the district is looking at any kind of assistance programs for buildings that are making a good faith effort,
Yes.
or at least to help subsidize the ADU residents?
Yes.
Green Bank.
There's
Green Bank. Okay. Okay.
No,
There's
that
also
was-
a program called the Accelerated Retrofit Program that is provided by DCSCU, which is affiliated with the government.
Okay.
And that is mainly for only fully low income buildings, right? Or limited equity co-ops. But last time I heard, which was about a month ago, I believe they're still looking for applicants, right? And I believe in your situation, you should at least receive some subsidies, right?
Okay.
So what I can do, if you reach out to us, again, our email is going to be at the end.
Okay.
We can provide you with a contact there. And then you can figure out if your building qualifies. They may require some information, rent rolls, and a few other things.
It's a covenant. It would be a provision in your, do you have a provision in your covenants that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
what they would need to see.
And
Right. Okay.
that will hopefully qualify you guys.
Well, even if it was direct assistance to help the ADU residents, cover the expense. I mean, the building as a whole might not qualify, but I think on an individual basis, the people who are living in those 20% units might. It'd be nice if there was assistance. So thank you for that information. I'll look into that.
And on top of that, we did receive more information about additional funds that will be going to low-income buildings on top of that program for specific equipment upgrades, right? So I'm sure they'll help you out. You're definitely in a position where a portion of your building really needs help and they can't just get a loan, right? That they have to repay over a certain period of time that they can't afford.
Right.
So reach out to us after and then we can help you out.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So Julie, on that same topic, last time we spoke about the DC Green Bank, it was still a very new concept. And I'm wondering if there's any other sort of updates on how that's progressed and whether that's been a useful resource.
So we are working with a few condos that are purchasing solar on their own, right? And this is kind of out connected with BEPS, but they were going to do this without BEPS regardless, right? They were working through DC Green Bank to try to get a loan. To me, it seems like it's just your traditional loan. I haven't seen any additional benefits that come out of it in terms of subsidies or lower
interest rates.
loans so that's something that we have to discuss with them a little bit further. But just so you know, the two condos that I'm speaking with, I don't think either of them ended up going with DC Green Bank. They ended up going with another traditional bank for their loan. So they were also not limited equity, right? So I don't know if limited equity co-ops receive a a benefit from there that not other buildings can, right? But that's something that we should definitely figure out. So let's definitely work on that on the side, Jack.
Okay, thanks.
So these, I want to preface this slide. These are examples from energy audits that we've done, but they are in no way universally applicable to every building. Every building is like a snowflake, right? It's unique. And you're going to have a different, cost, obviously, for the project. You're going to have a different payback, and you're going to have a different impact or expected impact on your Energy Star score. So these are just some examples to give you a basic idea of what type of investment could yield a potential gain. And LED lighting, our customer invested $11,700 into this. Again, it paid for itself in 2 years. So that's kind of a great thing to do, even if you're not subject to BEPS, right? But it did help them by improving their Energy Star score by 9 points, which is quite a bit on a scale of 100. Installing window films, relatively low cost, relatively good payback, but yet it did not improve the Energy Star score as much as that LED lighting was. So if you have to choose between one or the other, it's pretty obvious you would want to invest in LED lighting. Water conservation, these are low flow shower fixtures. And as I alluded to previously, this did not help them very much on their Energy Star score. It reduced the amount of the hot water costs, and that's where you see that 3-point improvement. And it does reduce their water bills, which is helpful from a budgetary perspective, but not that helpful from a BEPS perspective. And then finally, you've got the big investment. This is that variable refrigerant flow HVAC system that I described earlier. It's a nearly $1 million investment. The payback period is 14 years, so it's a pretty long payback period. But as you can see, it makes a massive difference in this particular building's Energy Star score. So for them, they're considering that as being, the one investment that basically carries them into compliance. And of course, it has a lot of nice, there's a lot of other non-quantitative benefits from these improvements, like improving the quality of life and the standard. The VRF system is cool because each unit can set their temperature. And sometimes you'll have a building that's at the top. You have a unit that's at the top of a building on the south side. That building will get a lot hotter than the building on the bottom on the north side, for example. So a VRF system is able to balance that and improve residents' comforts. So these are other things that should be considered, when you're making these types of improvements.
And just to add real quick to that slide, just like AZ mentioned, this does not apply to all buildings at all, right? I just did another audit where the LED lighting only increased it by 2 points. It all depends on what you had before. The reason why the VRF HVAC system is increasing it by 44 points is because this building had individual window AC units, right? Which are super.
And an old steam boiler.
And an old steam boiler that was leaking at some point. I remember there was natural gas leaking in that building. So it all depends where you are now. There will be some ECMs or energy conservation measures that will improve your score a lot more than the others. But it all depends on the energy audit.
All right, now our favorite subject. What type of impact a solar photovoltaic system can have in your building? So before I go too much into this slide, I do want to distinguish there are 2 kinds of solar. There's solar that generates electricity, and there's solar that generates hot water. Both can help you out, but we're really going to be only looking at solar electric right now, which is the only thing that's commercially available on a wide scale in the district. So here we have 4 actual buildings, and on the very left side, these are sizes of solar PV systems measured in kilowatts. So that's a measurement of power. So in the first example, we have 126 kilowatts of solar. That was able to generate 19% of that building's electricity. In 2019, their Energy Star score was 48. After implementing that, we estimate their Energy Star score would go to a 64, which is almost compliant. Their energy usage intensity in 2019 was about a 56. And after solar, it's still around 56. The reason why it hasn't changed is they're still using the exact same amount of energy. It's just coming from a cleaner source. So the Energy Star score will look at what the source of the energy is in order to determine the score. But the energy usage intensity doesn't care what the source is. They only look at how much you're using it. So solar is really only helpful on the standard target pathway, not so helpful on the performance pathway directly, although it does free up money to invest in other ECMs. So then we have another example. We see something similar with a 92 kilowatt system. And then we have a 124 kilowatt system, so almost the exact same size as the first system. But this only improved their Energy Star score by 4. And so I have a question for the audience. It's a little bit of a pop quiz. If you have 2 solar energy systems that are the same size, why is it so much more helpful for the first building than it is for the third building? And it's a tough question. Anybody venture a guess?
Square footage.
Good guess.
That could be an answer as well. Yeah.
Yeah, that I'll accept that. That could definitely be the case. Yeah. The other acceptable response was one building has a greater natural gas usage. So as a total percentage, if the first building uses a lot of natural gas relative to the second building, the relative impact of that clean energy is going to be reduced.
But actually, for this case, I think Jimmy was right, because the top one is a smaller building with a much larger roof. And on top of that, they are a master metered building, right? So we could build as large of a system as possible and still produce less than what they use. Whereas for the other building, it's a much larger building, smaller roof, right? But sometimes you can't max out the roof if the common area energy usage is a lot lower, right? Because it's not a master metered building. So there are different factors, but I think Jimmy was actually right on this one. So
yeah, and you can see that in that second column, the offset percentage for the 124 kilowatts is only 10%. So the solar energy is producing less of the total energy of that first one. Now, when you look at the fourth one, it's the same offset, right? And obviously you've got a smaller system in that fourth row at 72 kilowatts, but yet there's a much bigger impact for the 72 kilowatt array in terms of their Energy Star score than for the 124 kilowatts. So for that part, I think we can say more definitively that the 124 kilowatt has more natural gas usage, and yes, and hence its impact for the Energy Star score of solar will be less.
Yep. And just to add again, because this is very important, if you're choosing the performance pathway where you need to reduce your EUI by 20%, solar, even though solar is not going to help reduce your EUI score, like AZ mentioned, through the financing models, it can provide a significant amount of cash up front, anywhere between $20,000 to $100,000+ that you can implement towards the ECMs in your energy audit, or even use that money for the energy audit itself, because energy audits are not that cheap. So using that money from the solar array on your roof, still saving some energy, right? So you're still saving money in the long run, receiving that chunk of cash up front to use towards implementing these projects, including the energy audit itself.
All right, so things you can do in the short term. Double check, your benchmarking data is correct. These are there. We find tons of errors every day in these scores, so make sure these are reviewed carefully. You also want to compare your 2019 scores to the 2018 median score. You should have received a letter from DOE if you are subject to BEPS, which would fall under this bucket. And then if you are subject to BEPS, especially if you are far below 66, definitely we want to set you up with an ASHRAE level 2 audit. These are somewhat scalable. If you are constrained by a budget, we can do a lower scope audit to meet your budget needs. And every one of those will include some low-hanging fruits that might be able to get you over the edge. And then another thing you can do is create a subcommittee within your board to specifically deal with this issue, which should be high on your list of priorities. Engage with building residents, do some sort of communication about this, this policy that's going to affect everybody, because it really will require everybody in the building to work together to some extent in order to reach these goals. And then develop a strategic energy management plan. And this would flow naturally from the results of the ASHRAE level 2 audit.
And just to add to the slide, for your benchmarking score, we are already working with several buildings because their Energy Star scores, even after all the verification we've done from the data that was given to us, still seems very off because it's a newer building and somehow they have a score of 1, for example, right? With that said, what we're doing is we're asking the managers to try to find the actual square footage of the building. And if that's not available, we are currently working with an engineering firm, and it's been surprisingly very hard to find engineering firms that are willing to just calculate square footages of buildings. But we have found one. We're working with them on making sure the pricing is fair. And from there, making sure that your square footage is correct, because that is the #1 thing we've seen that was off from the benchmarking reports, right? So that's #1, square footage. #2, making sure that all of the building characteristics that were given to us, including the list of meters that we collected in the building for gas and electric, are all accurate. And if it's not, then we need to change that ASAP so that we can determine what your real score is. Some buildings may not even be subject to BEPS after we fix this. And if once you know your accurate score, then you can develop a much better plan moving forward, right? So that step is very important as your first step. And this is also why DC is requiring the verification process in 2024, but you do not want to know in 2024 if you're still subject for BEPS and you still haven't done anything yet. So let's try to take care of this now. And regarding the energy audit, I've worked with a few buildings where they have a score of a 64 or a 63 or a 62, but solar alone can bring their score above a 66. At that time, and you can come to us before and we can do that analysis for you, an energy audit isn't really required. If you know that solar or LEDs will bring you right across the finish line, then just be done with it at that point and make sure that your score does not drop after that. But yeah, that's all I have to add to that side.
And so you kind of covered a lot of this already, Julian, about our process. I don't have to go into detail about this, but we can help develop that strategic plan. We can help manage your communications with DOE, and we can also help you find the best energy auditor for your building.
And we also collect and compare multiple proposals on your behalf. We have a network of all different energy providers, from solar, LED, mechanical contractors for boilers, HVAC systems. We collect it. We know what factors you really need to compare. So we make it comparable on an apples to apples basis. And from there, we pretty much hold your hand throughout the process, make sure you're making the right decision, and make sure that the project is installed in a timely manner.
All right, well, that concludes our presentation. We can open the floor up to questions. If you do have to leave at this time, you're not going to hurt our feelings. But anybody have any questions for us?
I have one more question, if I may.
Yeah.
So the BEPS is the building's total electric usage and gas usage?
Yeah, so the energy usage intensity, which is one of the metrics for BEPS, it basically adds all the gas usage to the electric usage, and then you divide it by the square footage. So the higher the
Now-
usage, the lower your Energy Star score.
Are there any buildings where individual residents pay their own gas bills, or do all buildings pay the common gas?
So there are buildings that are individually metered. And what we have to do for those buildings from a benchmarking perspective is take everybody's meters and add them all up. So you take all the meters on the property, add them all up. So there theoretically shouldn't be a difference between a building that's sub-metered and a building that's master metered from a BEPS perspective.
Okay, because we pay all the the building pays for all the gas in the building. Residents pay their individual electrical bills.
Mhm.
So you're dividing our gas bill by the entire square footage of the building.
Yep.
And for electric, we collect the usage from every electric meter on the property. So how it works is
Okay,
we just collect the meter numbers for gas and electric. We submit them to both utilities, and then they send us the aggregated data.
interesting. I'm surprised they shared that, because in my previous life, we had trouble getting that information, but
It's not easy.
and so okay, so this is in our case, it's not just what the building can do, but it's stressing the point that you made, where you've got to get resident buy-in. You've got to get residents to make individual choices to reduce their own personal gas usage, which is a building expense, and their own personal electrical usage, which is
Yep.
being counted against the building.
Exactly.
Okay,
Like what I was guilty of before I knew about this. Don't leave your window open when the heat's running, even though you love that mix of cold and warm air, right? Those are simple things that could really make a huge impact. And if everybody puts their heads together and works together to reduce their individual usage, that could be the biggest impact you see, even compared to all the different ECMs you can take, right?
that's interesting. Yeah, I'll have my mom come
Rely
over
on
and
that.
start talking to people. She drilled that into me.
There you go.
Yeah, right. But
Whatever it takes.
do not rely on that to comply, because there's such thing as human error, right? And a lot of other people will say, you know what, I can just continue living the way I am. I'm sure everybody else will help reduce the score, right? So still think about the different measures that you can implement to
The tragedy of the commons.
exactly.
I have a question to follow up on what Chris was saying. We're talking about gas and electric usage. Does that include the usage by the commercial units that would be in a mixed use building?
So yes and no, right? So right now, there are a few mixed use buildings where the retail spaces and the multifamily section of the building share the same equipment. And that equipment is on a single meter. If you cannot sub-meter the usage from that equipment that's going to the retail spaces, then you have to combine it as a whole. And unfortunately, sometimes the retail spaces can drag the multifamily section down, right? However, another building I'm working on, the chillers and the boilers, there are plenty of them in the building, and there are ones that are associated just for the retail spaces. So they're going to sub-meter those. The rest is sub-metered so that we can take only the usage of the multifamily section, including the common areas that only you guys use, and separate it into its own benchmarking report. And then retail spaces have to do their own as well.
Gas is individually sub-metered for the restaurant use.
Great.
Okay, that's a good answer, because I'm just imagining Chipotle or something.
But again, reach back out
Yes.
to us. We're going to be sending this out to you. You all have AZ's email address from the invite. So send him an email. If you have mine, send me an email, and then we can continue this discussion. This is why we set this up, right? So we educate all of you. We make sure that the boards know what is going on with BEPS so that you don't figure this out in 2026. And essentially going the next steps, and we're here to help.
I have a question.
Yes.
Well, the Cairo heard everything you guys had to say last spring, and we said, okay, let's have an energy audit. And where's our audit?
I believe you still have the proposal. I will get with Jack on that to make sure that that you guys receive that.
What do you mean proposal?
So we have a few energy auditing companies that we work with, and we usually send those 2 to 3 proposals to compare.
And we chose a company and we said, okay, let's go.
Oh, then Cairo, you're already moving forward. Don't worry about it.
Well, I'm worried.
You've already proceeded with the audit. It's in the process right now. I think they scheduled a site visit if they haven't already. But the report is being developed right now. So
Well, wait a minute. We voted to spend the money with this company months ago, and there still hasn't been a site visit. Is that what you're telling me?
Gil, can I get with you after, if you don't mind? Because I'm gonna have to check through
Question
all
on
of
a
my-
totally different subject.
Yeah.
I have a different, the Cairo used to have electric submetering, where every unit had its electricity metered, and everybody paid their own electric bill to the building. Because
Mhm,
we pay one Pepco bill.
mhm.
We had to, there were problems with the system, and during investigating how to get that fixed, we were told that electric submetering is illegal in DC. And I've seen the language of the laws that people are citing on that, and we need to have that clarified about whether that really is true, that we can have submetering or not.
You can have sub-metering.
Yeah, there's been a lot of buildings that have done it.
So I guess a follow-up question is, like, if we submeter, if we stay mastered meter, when the fines are assessed, is it by like the tax owner on record and they just get a bigger tax bill, or does the building get a record that we have to charge our owners for?
The building.
Okay, so but if it was submetered, is it the same issue and we just get per unit, or?
So unfortunately not. Benchmarking, so the software we use to benchmark isn't set up that way. It's an aggregate. It's not by unit, right? And a lot of the time when we're collecting meter numbers, we don't know what a unit it's associated with. And I doubt DC would ever do that, just because it seems way too complicated to set up and to start charging people individually. So they're charging people as a whole if you do not comply.
Okay, so at the end of the day, like there would be individual decisions per unit owner, but we're all held to the lowest common denominator of each unit.
Pretty much, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Of course. Any other questions? Great. All right. Well, again, feel free to reach out to us. We can also do individual webinars for condo boards so that your entire board is aware, and then we can customize this more towards your building and where you are right now based on where you need to be. We can look deeper into your benchmarking report on those calls. And Gil, if you do not mind reaching out to me, I'm putting my email, my email address is already on the chat. If you can access that, jb@honeydewadvisors.com. And I'd be more than happy to look at where we are at the moment.
Great.
Yeah, you are in the pipeline. I did confirm it, Gil. So we can follow up with Spectrum as to when the exact date is.
Great. Thank you.
Just so you know, for the audit, the first few steps of the audit, which do usually take a month or so, is taking your bills and analyzing what is the biggest energy user in the building. This is before they even step into there, right? Then they also speak with the manager. What upgrades have you made? What upgrades do you plan on doing? What is your maintenance strategy? So on and so forth. So this is probably the reason why they haven't been in your building yet, but they will be, and they're just doing all the back end research first.
Okay. Let me know if you find out anything more specific, you can send me an email, okay?
All right, sounds good. All
Thanks.
right, thank you, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Have a good night.